careful. All is not as it seems. Concealed traps and pitfalls await the unwary. You must stay close and follow my instruction.
The World Heritage Site of Angkor in Cambodia is the focus of ongoing archaeological work for groups and individuals from around the world. Simultaneous to this academic attention is the ongoing popular culture fascination, building on long-standing historical representations of the region as a mysterious place populated by lost temples and impenetrable jungle. The two approaches coexist as separate conceptual spaces within the contemporary spaces of Angkor. While it is true that the two approaches do remain separate, they also influence and impact upon each other, often in unforeseen ways. Multiple ways exist of seeing, viewing, representing, and moving through the geographic spaces of Angkor. Many key representations of Angkor can be identified in relation to the European myth of an abandoned Angkor. The myth of abandonment is linked to the way the spaces of Angkor have been reimagined, specifically from a Western perspective. The major implication of the effects of these representations is that these ways of seeing through space and scale have constructed an imaginary Angkor with which many Westerners interact rather than the actual Angkor. Approaches to Angkor are often formulated in reference to the imagined space rather than the actual. The mythology of an abandoned Angkor is something very specific to Western and European perspectives. The major themes of romanticized mythology developed during the 1860s when explorers, botanists, travelers, and traders such as Dio King, Henri Mouhot, Duat d'Allegri, and Francis Garnier brought back both written descriptions and visual representations of the area. Temples had certainly fallen into disuse and become enveloped by plant life, so there was an actual abandonment at play in the landscape. The notion that the temples were completely abandoned, however, or even lost and hence rediscovered by these explorers, is fallacy. As new media representations developed, however, the mythologizing of Angkor proliferated into new forms. The imagined space of Angkor is a complex environment that has developed over time through a variety of influences, including travelers' tales and the developing layers of fictional representation in popular media. One development that further solidified the imaginary space as an environment in its own right was the development of technology with three-dimensional modeling capabilities. Three-dimensional modeling itself is not a new development, but in fact stretches back as far as 1860, when Angkor Wat was virtualized in a smaller Thai-scale model, following a failed temple relocation attempt by admirer King Rama IV. Another three-dimensional work representing Angkor temple architecture was made from the casts of Duat d'Allegri and shown at the Universal Exhibition in Paris in 1867. A similar event occurred in 1931 when a scale model of Angkor Wat was constructed for the Paris Colonial Exhibition. These models present an Angkor Wat divorced from the context of its surrounding landscape and environment. A temple becomes singular artifact, which once again is how the temples of Angkor have often been seen, both academically and in popular culture. The sheer complexity of Angkor led in some cases to a focus on the temples, to an exclusion of a more holistic interpretation of landscape. These early 3D models present the illusion of the empty temple, divorcing the architecture from Angkor further from the context of environment and history, moving actual structure into a new created reality. The virtual space has been further solidified and developed as computer technologies allowed Angkor to be mapped as a virtual landscape. Initial appearances of Angkor in a computer-generated form occur well outside of academia, however, featuring heavily in the imaginary landscape of adventure through the video game. It is much more common for popular culture references to Angkor to be associated with that niche of the adventure genre that depicts archaeology as a hunt for lost treasure. Holtorf's work can be used to categorize the video game depiction of archaeology at Angkor through four popular culture categories. 1. The archaeologist as adventurer. 2. The archaeologist as detective. 3. The archaeologist as someone providing revelation or startling information. And 4. The archaeologist as custodian or keeper of sites and artifacts, protecting the past. One of the early digital representations can be seen in the action game ActRaiser by Nintendo, which features Angkor Wat as a backdrop for one of its sequences. The words overlaid on the image of Angkor Wat in the setup story state, "People who entered the ruins searching for wealth went in and were never seen again," once more perpetuating the myth of Angkor as a lost ruin, adding the forgotten treasure and wealth angle of archaeology-inspired adventure tales. This rendition further mixes in the concept of the haunted place of mystery, with Angkor portrayed as a location that people entered but from which none returned. In the action sequence of the game, the player must fight through a version of Angkor Wat that features floating Grim Reaper-style ghosts, lizard creatures spitting fire, alien creatures blasting energy, wall reliefs spitting darts, rising and falling floors, secret entrances, and retracting spikes. All of this, of course, has very little to do with the actual Angkor. But the modern mythology that has grown from such popular culture representations shapes and informs the imaginary spaces that now define so many interactions with Angkor. The idea of historic site used as dramatic backdrop has proved inspirational for other games as well, stretching from Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat right through to the Lara Croft Tomb Raider adventures. The earliest games, such as ActRaiser, use Angkor simply as a colourful backdrop for the adventure to take place in front of. However, later games subvert this by actualizing a three-dimensional representation of Angkor that the game player actually moves through. Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation is one example, where a fictional environment is mapped based on the concepts of the romanticized and imagined Angkor. The internal geography of Angkor Wat used in the fourth Tomb Raider game was completely altered, bearing no resemblance whatsoever to reality. The three-dimensional architectural model of the temple was designed for effective gameplay, rather than as a representation of the actual location. Spikes, darts, ropes, and underwater swimming form the major parts of Lara Croft's version of a journey through Angkor Wat. As these elements are developed into a virtual space, however, imaginary Angkor effectively becomes a real place. The computer-generated Lara Croft was also realized on the silver screen by Angelina Jolie in 2 Tomb Raider films, the first of which had a number of scenes filmed on location in Cambodia. The use of Angkor as a location does not, however, equate to representing what is actually there. Indeed, in the film, Lara Croft is seen descending beneath the temples into hidden crypts, where strange statues come to life and attack her. The existence of subterranean tombs is a complete misnomer in terms of cultural and architectural accuracy in relation to Angkorian temples. Rather, it is a story element drawn from the adventure games that the film was based on, a motif from the title, Tomb Raider. The archaeologist as adventurer is predominantly to be found seeking treasure in forgotten tombs, so that is what Lara Croft must be seen to be doing in Cambodia, whether there actually are tombs there or not. The temples of Angkor become contextualized in such representations as a new three-dimensional fictional environment, a complicated tapestry within which the adventurers play. The fact that Tomb Raider-themed tours were then designed in Cambodia, with tourists able to reenact the Lara Croft experience, further heightens the fictionalized reality within the spaces of the actual environment, to the detriment of an archaeological agenda. Another example of this is the psychological horror game, Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. Once again, this game takes the image and notion of the Lost Temple, transforms it into an imagined yet real environment, one that is quite separate from the reality in Cambodia. Imagined Angkor has certainly been perceived as a real place by many visitors to Cambodia, whose interpretation of how they move through the spaces actualizes an imagined environment in their minds. The fact that computer games have also created virtual models of the long-imagined adventure unreality of Angkor has actualized the unreal into a geographically realized environment. Through computer interaction, one can move through the imaginary spaces of Angkor. In Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem, Angkor Thom is used as the final resting place of Mantorok, a deity initially worshipped by the Khmer people as a fertility god. The story follows Alexandra Roivas, who is armed with a book she found amongst her grandfather's possessions titled The Tome of Eternal Darkness. The book, bound in human skin and bone of course, holds within its pages clues to an ancient mystery involving powerful deities, ancient beings, and the long-deserted city of Angkor, located beneath the main character's family mansion, containing powerful magical machinery inside. The section of story set in Angkor Thom refers to the binding of the corpse god Mantorok, a manipulative god of chaos that has established a physical presence on Earth. The creature is realized visually as a massive amorphous being with countless eyes and mouths, a visual that has been recorded on the temple walls of Angkor within the game environment. The closest a game has come to allowing an archaeological agenda into its three-dimensional reality is Civilization IV: Beyond the Sword. In this game, Angkor Thom is the third city the player needs to build. What this demonstrates is the colourful backdrop of the adventure genre, now in actualized space, opens up a possibility for heritage and archaeology concerns to connect with imaginary Angkor. The possibility now exists for heritage and archaeological viewpoints to be modelled in the same way, effectively connecting historical concerns and explorations to the imagined space environment. A number of works have already taken advantage of this, including the ongoing computer simulations of Tom Chandler, who is using computer gaming technology to map heritage environments. Some of his work includes environments based on Grolier's maps of Angkor, providing the opportunity to examine landscape, vegetation, human habitation, and movement across the area through the parameters of the virtual world, parameters set not by fictional adventure, but by the specific concerns and interests of archaeologists. Such modelling moves away from seeing the temples as isolated and looks at modelling landscapes in order to explore issues and questions related to context. Three-dimensional modelling has also been used by others, such as on the Angkor 3D project, a team generating three-dimensional models drawn from aerial photographic data and historical photographs, demonstrating new ways of interacting with and moving through historical environments. With similar intentions in mind, Sarah Kenderdine developed digital heritage installations at Museum Victoria. In one of these works, titled Sacred Angkor, stereographic panoramas of the landscape of Angkor were presented in a space called the Virtual Room. A series of screens create an octant which museum visitors could walk around, looking into a 3D environment from multiple points of view. Providing an immersive setting and real-world scale, the possibilities of the work, according to Kenderdine, offer new opportunities for rendering the experience of cultural heritage. The Sacred Angkor work is made up of 9 slowly rotating panoramas of Angkor, taken using high-resolution panoramic imaging for Museum Victoria in 2004. Kenderdine states that the project was conceived for contemplation, circumambulation, identification and re-socialization, but it is the reworking of heritage discourses through technical innovation that Kenderdine sees as having the greatest potential for future development. The digital imagery used in this presentation involved recoloring sections of relief sculpture, combining 3D terrain models based on the archaeological mapping of buildings and landscape, and animating water flow, with areas like ritual pools refilled in the panorama. Archaeological data and heritage concerns inform a three-dimensional environment where the interaction is not narrative adventure, but instead contemplation of place. Kenderdine also cites the importance of sound to create an immersive experience, referring to ambisonic sound recordings and audio compositions, sound architectures, and spatialized soundscapes of appropriate fidelity. The effect of Chandler's computer-generated landscapes is also altered through use of sound, as in one animated sequence, compiled from an aerial perspective, flying across a virtual recreation of 16th century Angkor. The sequence depicts Angkor at the height of its glory and power and brings concepts of colour and movement to this recreation of the past. A soundtrack of grand opera or sweeping classical score would highlight concepts of grandeur and power in the mind of the viewer, and such a soundtrack would be the more regularly chosen form in computer game representations. In this instance, however, sounds of pastoral life are presaged instead. While viewing a grand virtual sequence sweeping across Angkor at its height, the viewer is treated to the sounds of cattle and chickens. It is such choices which presage the intention of the heritage practitioner and archaeologist. The aim is to use the computer-generated tools developed for entertainment to instead enlighten, challenge, and educate. The imaginary space of Angkor thus becomes infused with archaeological intention, creating new potentials and possibilities. One possibility for academic work is, therefore, to use the popular culture approaches as a system of delivery, but to load them with archaeological data and prime them with heritage and archaeological intentions. This imagined space of Angkor is a complex environment, constantly changing as it is informed both by the actual Angkor and new fictional constructions. Representations of the imagined environment have developed into fully realized three-dimensional spaces, making imagined Angkor just as actual an environment to explore as the real Angkor. A connection to the imagined and disconnection from the actual leads to serious problems in dealing with the realities of Angkor and the heritage challenges that must be faced. Viewing archaeology as separate from the processes of representation, narrative and discourse which actively frame the interactions of contemporary Cambodia is to open the door to potential problems, including the political, social and economic. In order for archaeological work to function optimally at Angkor, it needs to actively address the issues relating to popular culture, imagined spaces and tourism. In short, to function practically in a complex environment, archaeologists need to care about the larger and often peripheral aspects which connect to their work. To say that popular culture is a banal, peripheral, unworthy of attention is insufficient when the banal is directly impacting upon the work of the archaeologist or the presentation and management of heritage resources.
Good men have died for the information contained herein, and cruel men have bartered the information for their own ends. For this we must respect it. We will not deviate from its route, and you will not deviate from my instruction. This way.